Tonight, more bloodshed in Mexico. Another journalist killed this week.
As we see, that camera person just got
Our
shot.
job is to report the news, not fabricate it.
You're right.
That's the government's
I am
job.
press. I don't care if you don't.
Okay, I'm down.
Right? There's
I'm not going to
90%
get
bullshit.
Can you stay counted? You are fake news.
Famous fake
Is
news
this
at
the
this point.
price one needs to pay to speak the truth?
Fake news.
It's always about silencing the
choice,
target.
but fuck it, I quit.
Well, hello, welcome to Real News Live. Glad to have you guys here with us tonight on this Wednesday afternoon or evening and December 13th, 2023. Hello, everyone. Today, though, the House, of course, is authorizing Biden's impeachment. Of course, every Republican rallying behind the political process. It's politically charged because, honestly, it's going along party lines. The entire House Republican Conference recorded in support of the impeachment process now, of course, for the ultimate penalty for a president, punishment of what the Constitution described as high crimes and misdemeanors, which can lead to the removal of office if convicted in the Senate trial. Authorization, of course, of the months-long inquiry ensures that the impeachment investigation extends well into 2024, when Biden, of course, will be running for re-election against seemingly squaring off against his former opponent, Donald Trump, who has twice impeached during his time in the White House for BS reasons. We know this. Trump has pushed the GOP allies in Congress to move swiftly on the impeachment of Biden because, honestly, he's corrupt. We know Biden's corrupt because of everything that's been in touch with it. And the evidence that has came forward about his family's business dealings and his business dealings in the years-long probe investigation raising ethical questions and emerging that Biden has acted corruptly or accepted bribes in his current role. He has acted corruptly. We know that. He's benefited his family by his position in government. And we know this directly because he asserted meetings with these political giants of other countries like Russia and China for funds to go to his family. And we're looking at his weak policies on China, of course, all that having an impact. The whole process, of course, is extremely, I can't say legitimate, but I want to say extremely legitimate at this point, because we know that 10% was supposed to go to the big guy. We know that he got 10% of one of the deals for sure. And we know multiple other things that have come down the line that show the corruption because the massive amount of shell companies the Biden family, of course, is intrigued in or involved in at this point. That's not all the news, though. As Congress and Biden finally mulling big changes on immigration policy, what they are and what they could do, what they could mean, is a big question at this point. As we see negotiations changing over the immigration system that Republicans are demanding in exchange for providing more money to Ukraine against its fight for Russia, the Israel-Hamas war. Democratic president said he's willing to make significant compromises on the border. It's not compromises, let's be honest. Republicans are blocking wartime aid in Congress that we shouldn't be involved in. The ultimate thing is now Biden is trying to give in to, of course, stopping the record number of illegal immigrants from crossing the southern border that pose security risks. That authorities cannot adequately screen all the migrants that are entering the United States and are straining the country's resources. Lawmakers are justified that their citizens, that their people that they represent, constituents, are sending billions of dollars to other countries in a time of war and failing to address the border at home. Constituents right now are pissed. I'm pissed. Seeing the money go to illegal immigration and to supposedly asylum seekers and going to foreign nations. Look at the billions of dollars, of course, that have been laid out so far. Those could be easily used to help American veterans, American homeless, or people that desperately need help that would not easily receive it. Of course, as the chaos of the border continues. The White House taking a more active role in the talks is a good thing at this point. Republican policy demands are reasonable, I believe. If you want to send more money to foreign nations, then you've got to cut the border problem. You've got to stop the humanitarian corridor that is happening into the United States. It's not humanitarian, let's be honest. It's a corridor of immigrants, of illegals entering the country. Not legally. We have a legal process to do that. I mean, the U.S. relies heavily on legal immigrants, I know that, in order to fill jobs and other means. That does not mean we're going to just admit tens of thousands of people that shouldn't be here. I mean, let alone the border crossing issue. We have tens of thousands of Ukrainians that have fled since the Russian invasion here in the United States now, which is one thing we have to deal with. But we have Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela, all these different countries sending thousands of people, or letting 1,000 people fleeing those countries, hundreds of thousands, nearly 270,000 people have been admitted into the country just in October. I mean, we're not talking about the people that got through the border illegally. We're talking about the people admitted through the border. 250,000 people. So, of course, this asylum program has to change. It has to. To qualify for citizenship, someone has to demonstrate fear of prosecution back in their home due to specific sets of criteria, which they're not doing. They're not having to prove any of that to get on U.S. soil at this point. All they do is have to say they are in fear, and then they get set with a trial date and given a ticket and given a gift card with $5,000 or a Visa card with $5,000 on it, $2,200 a month, free food, free housing, free medical, and nobody bats an eye. We have Americans here on Social Security that get not even half of that a month. Barely any Americans on Social Security get that a month, $2,200. They get that on top of housing and food and shelter and medical. This is ridiculous. The process of asylum seekers and the whole benefit system is ridiculous, honestly. It's hurting our country at its core. Watching what's happening in the Middle East, or of course in Russia and that side of the world, it's not looking any better. It's crazy. Of course, the FDA started screening U.S. cinnamon imports, not just, of course, because the kids are getting sickened by lead-tainted applesauce, but now they're figuring out it's the cinnamon itself. So the screening of imports of cinnamon from multiple countries for toxic lead contaminants after growing reports, of course, of the children sickened by eating pouches of applesauce and apple puree. Cinnamon manufacturer from Ecuador is one of the likely sources of the high levels of lead found in the recalled applesauce puree, linked to illnesses in at least 34 children in 22 states so far. And those are the results we're seeing instantly, these illnesses. These elevated levels of lead in children's blood right now, of course, as the spices are baked in popular in holiday baking, we're expecting these cases to skyrocket. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy with this being involved. I mean, yes, the Wana banana applesauce puree, of course, was the first to be flagged for the high levels of lead, more than 200 times higher than the proposed FDA guidance would allow. There's no guidelines now, let's be honest. But having 34 children sick from lead poisoning is alarming because we know the long-term damages of lead and mental illness and well beyond that. Of course, the United States government finally stepping in, now realizing it's not just from the applesauce, but from the cinnamon itself. So if you bought cinnamon the last couple months, I suggest, if it's not pure cinnamon sticks, that you go and actually get some pure cinnamon sticks and grind it yourself. Because the raw cinnamon is where the lead is coming from. And I don't want you guys getting sick or sickening other family members by not knowing this. Really a top concern right now. Along those lines, of course, the House panel urging for tougher trade rules for China, raising the chances of more tariffs for China. So, of course, we're looking at this. Of course, more tariffs for China and Chinese-made goods are possibly the subject to the higher tariffs and the risk of increased tensions between the two economic superpowers right now. So, of course, seeing these preferential trade status of China, which we do rely heavily on for everything, everyday goods, now seeing the government want to put tariffs and increased trade sanctions on China. All this, of course, is going to determine what the economic sector, and subject to be higher tariffs, of course, we'll see higher prices in the stores as inflation may be under control now, supposedly, reflecting the growing willingness to Congress to build on the tariffs and even risk retaliation from China that would harm many farmers and ranchers and U.S. exporters at this point, and imports. As, of course, we know, everyday citizens rely on medications that are only produced in China, still at this point. China, of course, dealing with more information being asked of them from WHO about the, of course, illness of pneumonia clusters, as pneumonia clusters are found more than 22 states today. That's right, we have this ammonia type virus clusters in the United States. It's a respiratory illness that presents as a pneumonia. Of course, it doesn't test positive for pneumonia at this point. Over 22 states now in the United States. Of course, this was virus only came out less than 4 weeks ago. So, of course, going on this information, we have to watch what's happening and watch what's unfolding as we speak, because we don't know what's going to happen next, especially with this rise in illness cases as the holiday season nears. Americans need to be prepared. Holiday season is coming quick, and of course, these viruses are not slowing down anytime soon. And Americans need to understand, and the world needs to understand, other countries are seeing a jump in respiratory diseases. Of course, this is another pandemic in the making. Nobody's calling it that yet, but let's be honest. The number of cases globally are greater than they were 1 month after COVID was discovered. We're about a month in now. Watching, of course, the Middle East as Israel's looming support for around the world is dwindling for the war in Hamas war, suggesting that the Israeli prime minister needs to make changes. Of course, he doesn't want to make any changes. President Biden, of course, warned Israel, starting to lose support for around the world for its war in Hamas, which began, of course, back on October 7th, when the deadly attacks from the terrorist organization were launched against Israel itself. Got a tough decision here to make. Either Israel is going to stand alone, which would bring us into biblical times. We're watching, of course, as Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and most other nations, a part of UN and NATO, are calling for a sustainable ceasefire in Gaza. All this being backed as individual or international efforts for the ceasefire are being called upon, as the U.S., of course, is sideswiping that, of course, trying to push it off the table. The UN, of course, though, saying it's going to happen. At the same time, healthcare workers in Gaza today have been taken by Israel forces. This information is coming from doctors amidst horrible conditions at the hospitals right now in Gaza. A senior doctor in northern Gaza says dozens of medical staffers at his hospital have been taken to an undisclosed location by the Israeli military as the, of course, enclave wider healthcare system teeters on the edge of collapse. The head practitioner, of course, of the hospital said in a phone interview, of course, that the facilities were located saw particularly heavy bombing Tuesday, followed by an arrival of Israeli troops, describing the situation as very dangerous. The troops told all men between the age of 16 to 65 to leave the building to be searched. More than 70 medical staffers were arrested and taken to an unknown area. 70. This is crazy. This is a statement, of course, echoing the statement coming from Gaza's Hamas-controlled health ministry as well, saying that less than 24 hours earlier, Israel tanks shelled and hit the hospital's maternity ward on Monday, striking and killing 2 women and left 2 more so badly wounded that legs required amputation. And that information came directly from Israel's forces. This is sad. Infants have been found dead and decomposing in the evacuated hospital ICU in Gaza. It's truly a humanitarian crisis there, and I hate to say that, but I feel for the people of Gaza. Israel's actions in around the hospital in Gaza have come under fierce criticism as medical workers and NGOs warn that the healthcare system in the territory is barely functioning and cannot tolerate more strain. The Israeli army raided, of course, Gaza's largest hospital in a search for conclusive proof that the large-scale command and control it claimed was there, but of course none was found. Hamas command and control section was not found by the Israeli military, even though they raided the largest hospital in Gaza Strip. Doctors rushed to evacuate patients and dozens of newborns in need of incubators, but of course no help from the Israeli government. Of course, seeing tunnels that are uncovered inside the hospital compound, were small underground rooms. They weren't actually part of the main tunnel shaft. Of course, nobody knows the true indifference of this, the value that's going to come out of this. Israel's plan to keep fighting as the UN General Assembly votes for a ceasefire in Gaza. Israel pressed ahead, of course, as the offense against Gaza's Hamas rulers. They said it could go on for weeks or months. The United Nations General Assembly voted overwhelmingly to demand a humanitarian ceasefire and a strong demonstration of global support for ending the Israel-Hamas war. Israel, of course, not doing what is asked of them at this point, leading to a growing isolation of the U.S. and Israel from the United Nations. That's right. We're growing in isolation from the rest of the countries around the world as we support Israel in their feat to, of course, continue their onslaught in the Gaza Strip. And I understand, yes, terrorism is bad. Yes, they need to be taken out, the terrorists do. Seeing the amount of citizens that have died and perished now, in a sense, it is truly, truly heartbreaking. Of course, we have Yemen, the Houthi rebels striking a Norwegian-flagged tanker in the Red Sea and a merchant ship. Missiles fired by Yemen's Houthi rebels smashed into a Norwegian-flagged tanker in the Red Sea off the coast of Yemen near a key maritime choke point. The rebels and authorities said are reporting this. So assaults on the oil and chemical tanker Streda compounds a campaign that the Iranian-backed rebels targeting ships close to the, of course, strait, to apparently now striking those that have clearly no ties to Israel, potential imperil of cargo and energy shipments that come through the Suez Canal, further widens the international impact of course, the Hamas-Gaza war, or Hamas-Israel war that is now raging in the Gaza Strip. Video statement saying that the rebels only fired on a vessel when it rejected all warning calls. We don't know if that's true or not. That's the information coming out right now. Of course, the U.S. Military Command Center said the anti-ship cruise missile launched from a Houthi-controlled area in Yemen hit the stranding. It's just crazy. This unfolding war, of course, and the evidence that the world is no longer backing the United States. They're backing off, of course, of helping the United States or being involved in the United States. All this in the Middle East, of course, as we look to Ukraine, as Zelensky, of course, came to beg the United States for aid, as he pleaded for aid for Ukraine on the Capitol and the White House. Our fight is yours, according to Zelensky. Of course, what he's fighting for, and of course, his impassionate pleas to Congress for approval of more assistance to fight the Russian invasion, has come on deaf ears. As Ukraine is facing a daunting winter after Zelensky cannot convince Republicans to move quickly on new aid, because they have much better things to do at this point. Standing alongside his Ukrainian counterpart at the White House, little more than a year ago, President Joe Biden, of course, vowed American support for Ukraine as long as it takes. This commitment was long and repeated about 22 months since the, of course, Russian unprovoked invasion. Or that's what we're calling it anyways. Zelensky, of course, paying another visit to Washington under dramatic altered circumstances. Biden pledged the U.S. would provide critical weapons and equipment as long as we can, not now indefinitely, or as long as it takes, but as long as we can. Quite the shift in language appearing to the acknowledgement of following Zelensky's 11th hour appeal for more assistance. American backing for Ukraine is neither a guarantee nor open-ended commitment. Comes for the Ukraine, of course, is the harsh winter of Russian attacks on Ukraine's infrastructure made worse by the fading prospect of coming help from the capital. Watching today, of course, multiple injuries reported from a nighttime missile attack on Kiev that wounded at least 53 people. Ukraine's pleads for more European support, as they're not getting it from the U.S. now. The barrage of missiles targeted Kiev on, of course, Wednesday today, leading to at least 53 people, officials said, as Ukrainian president sought more military aid from Europe after Washington secured, or the trip to Washington secured no new pledges. Loud explosions rocked the capital at 3 a.m. City's air defenses are activated for a second time this week. Ukrainian Air Force said it launched Russia launched 10 ballistic missiles towards Kiev. Supposedly, all were intercepted by air defense, but yet 53 people were killed. Attack underscores the continuing threat that Ukraine faces from the Kremlin missile arsenal, and it's already 21 months into the war. Russian stockpiles of air-launched cruise missiles from its heavy bomber fleet, according to recent assessments by the UK's Ministry of Defence, are far from being dwindled. We're expecting heavy bombardments this winter of Ukrainians' power grids as Moscow's targeted energy infrastructure last year in an effort to deny Ukrainians heat, light, and running water and break their fighting spirit. We're expecting more of that, of course, as winter sets in and hinders troop movements, allowing little change along the front lines. Long-range air bombardments are playing a growing role. Ukraine's dwindling supplies of air defense munitions and other munitions, of course, prompting Zelensky to beg for more, but of course, not being able to get anything, as lawmakers have yet to approve President Biden's request for $61 billion for Ukraine. His trip accomplished no breakthroughs. So Zelensky, of course, wasting time begging and pleading for more stuff to fight a war that we knew was unwinnable in the first place. So now they're out of firepower. All of this unfolding. Tragic for the citizens there, of course. That's Russia's Putin. Nuclear warnings from Putin as his bid for a new term, of course, being pushed forward. Proposing 6 more years of power for the Russian President Vladimir Putin is likely. Nuclear tensions with the United States, of course, are up in arms right now as time runs out for the last remaining treaty that limits the number of warheads each side can deploy. So we're watching, of course, the last treaty that would limit the amount of arms Russia could deploy coming up just any day now, as advanced nuclear arms, and said it could wipe out any aggressor. We know they have advanced nuclear arms to ours. So. Watching this as the flag raising ceremony for 2 new submarines, the Emperor Alexander III, that were tested last month, tested a nuclear capable Ryazan and an intercontinental ballistic missile. So we're talking a new intercontinental ballistic missile holding much more tactical nukes for Russia on going into the 2 new submarines that they just raised their flag on Monday. This one thing after another. Last month he signed, of course, the law revoking Russia's ratification of the global treaty on testing, bans nuclear testing. We have not seen Moscow test or carry out a test yet. We're expecting them to have another test soon. Security analysts say nuclear weapons assume greater importance in thinking, of course, of Putin's thinking than his actual struggle with Ukraine. And Western countries have weaned themselves off of Russian industry or energy, weakening, of course, his ability to cut pressure by cutting off oil and gas. But his new partnership with Saudi Arabia is doing just that. As Americans, this is crazy news. Watching what's happening day to day, and of course, seeing what's unfolding, it's just terrible. I feel bad for all of us. I feel bad for our soldiers overseas, as multiple attacks on military bases are still happening on a day-to-day basis. And it's sad. It is a sad place to be in this world, to know that we're in this shape because a president will not act like a president. Instead, he's too busy making money for himself, too busy pocketing what he can. His family's getting what they can out of it. There's people around the world, of course, watching the U.S. and saying, we're not going to support him anymore. It's a sad, sad state of events, and it's a sad time for America. But good night. God bless you. Be safe. Be strong. But be prepared, because we don't know what's going to unfold next. We got a virus that, of course, is ripping through the world at this point, that nobody's calling a pandemic, but truly is. It's devastating. It's only going to get worse from here. But good night. God bless you. God bless America.